Welcome to the Diet Doctor Podcast with Dr. Brett Scher. Today, my guest is Jen Unwin. Now, Jen is a clinical health psychologist with the National Health Service in England and also runs a group coaching program with her husband, David Unwin, where they focus on low-carb nutrition. Now, Jen is an expert at dealing with people with chronic health conditions and helping them have hope. And I think that's one of the big messages of this interview, that she really finds instilling people with the message of hope helps success. And we talk about a lot of the challenges people face, because let's face it, life doesn't go in a straight line. Behavior change is hard. Nutritional change is hard, but it certainly can be done. And we just have to be able to prepare sort of for what the challenges may be and understand how to overcome them and keep coming back to the message of hope. And I think that's sort of the big take home from this interview with Jen Unwin. Now, she doesn't have products to sell. She doesn't have websites to visit, but you can see her on Twitter at Jen_Unwin. And she just has a wonderful message to spread. So I hope you enjoy this interview. And if you want to see the transcripts or see any of our prior podcast episodes, you can find us at dietdoctor.com. Enjoy the interview. Jen Unwin, thank you so much for joining me on the Diet Doctor Podcast today.
You're welcome.
Well, so here we are at Low Carb Denver, and you gave a wonderful talk with your husband. And the teamwork sort of between you two, even though you don't work in the same office, the concept of the teamwork, doing the medical side and doing the behavioral side of just behavior change, dietary change. Give us a little bit of your background and tell us how you got into this, working with people with health problems and helping them with their behavior changes.
Yeah, sure. So I'm trained as a clinical psychologist, but I specialize in helping people who've got long-term health conditions. So that's something I've done in the NHS for, I think it's 32 or 33 years now. And I've got a particular interest in the role of hope and trying to kind of enhance people's hopefulness for the effect that they can have in their own lives, really, to improve their well-being and their quality of life, even in the face of conditions that endure. As we know, these days there's lots of people living for many, many years with chronic pain or diabetes or other disabilities that maybe limit their lives in some way or challenge their quality of life, and that for many, many people make daily life a struggle. So I suppose what I've dedicated myself to is understanding how to help people to live well and to have some sort of hope and positivity in their lives. So the way that I've kind of tried to think about that is drawing a lot of influence from the positive psychology literature, which I find really fascinating, which is about the role of things like hope and optimism and being goal-focused and what difference that can make to people. Yeah. And then how to sort of have those conversations with people in a way that's helpful and empowering. And I use an approach called solution-focused. It comes from, historically kind of began in the States, actually, as a form of family therapy, in a place called Milwaukee. And it's been around for quite some time now and is used in education and social care and as a form of therapy, as a kind of conversation which focuses relentlessly on the person and their own personal goals and their own personal strengths and so on, to enable them to do that, to have to move in a direction which is right for them and is more hopeful and positive for them. Yeah. So that's kind of quite a long answer. It's
a good answer. Yeah, I like how you talk about hope and positivity, because it's clear that when you have a medical condition that weighs on you every day, that you seem like you can't escape, whether it's chronic pain, whether it's depression, whether it's obesity or trying to manage blood sugars or something, and you're not seeing progress, hope is really the first to go. And far too often people just throw their hands up in the air. And part of the problem is sort of the message sometimes they're getting from doctors too, is it's your fault. You just need to be better. You need to be more dedicated and have more willpower. So I can see how hope will disappear.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So what's the first interaction like when somebody is sort of in despair and kind of feels like there's no hope? How do you get them to start to see the light? I know there's probably a lot of answers to that, but I'm curious if you have sort of like a take-home message for people about that.
Yeah. So my first question when I meet someone, apart from kind of the niceties, is always, well, what are your best hopes for us working together? What if you look back in 6 months' time and you think, well, wow, I'm so glad I went to that appointment, because obviously, people have lost hope. No, not many people want to come and see a psychologist, really.
Right.
You perhaps wouldn't choose to do that. You make yourself vulnerable, and you don't know what the person's going to be like or what they're going to ask you. So I always say, wow, you've come today. Obviously you're hoping for something to be different or better. Tell me about that. And that's always the first really detailed exploration, which is around, if they can. I mean, sometimes that's even a real struggle for people. They've got so low and hopeless that it's a real struggle to think about what might be different and what might be better, because they've lost a sense that there's much possibility of that.
Right. They've probably never taken the time to think about what success would look like, because they've given up on it. So just asking them the question to visualize what their success would look like and explain it to you is probably a tough job for them.
Exactly. Now, some people take that immediately and can kind of tell you quite clearly. That's kind of a proportion of people. But as I say, there are other people who really struggle with that. So you have to spend quite a lot of time, and even sometimes the first and even the second appointment might be around a sensitive kind of exploration of what better might look like for them, and trying to get. I think what you said there was really important, was that kind of almost like a visualization of what that might look like.
Yeah.
And that's a really powerful thing. Once people start to be able to imagine that in their minds and picture some kind of sense of better or sort of preferred future, that's when the magic begins, really.
Right.
Once somebody can kind of picture that in their minds.
Right.
Yeah.
And also sort of that inner critic that so many of us have, like, I'm just not good enough. I just can't do it. I'm not strong enough. I mean, do you have to have people sort of address and attack that inner critic as well?
Yeah. So I think as human beings, I always say to people, we're sort of primed to notice the negative or the threats in a situation. I always say that's why we're here, because our ancestors were really good at, looking out for threats or negative stuff. So we're kind of primed for that. And yes, as we've said, people get very dispirited. People will be very critical, and they notice all the things that they can't do anymore.
Right.
The things that are causing them more pain, that will tend to focus on that. And that is human nature. So the approach that I take is really, through the kind of questions that you're asking people, is directing their attention to other things, shining the light on other things, and trying to train them to do that. And you do that through the kind of questions that you ask. So, when did you, sensitively asking, when did you have even a slightly less bad day? Or, tell me about a time when, just for even a few minutes, you weren't thinking about the pain. So you have to ask very sensitively, because people are suffering, and you have to acknowledge that. But asking for tiny glimpses, if you like, I often say it's like in a grey sky. Are there any times when there's just the tiniest little bit of blue? Tell me about that. Or let's kind of unpack that. When you had a slightly better day, and I tell you about it. What made the difference? What was going on that was different that day, and trying to be a real kind of detective.
I bet you notice a change in their behavior, maybe even how they're sitting or how their facial expressions. I bet you notice a change when they do that.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. People will sit up, or they'll kind of smile. And also, as the practitioner, you're really watching out for those tiny signs yourself. And that's the other thing, shining the light on that. So I often say to people, I ask them about their slightly better day. I'll give you an example. Slightly better day. People often say things like, "Oh, well, the grandchildren came round, and that made me laugh because I got distracted by, they were messing about or something, and that was really nice." And I say, "Oh, I notice you smiling when you talk about that. Your eyes light up when you talk about that, and you can really dig down into that and emphasize it and kind of shine a light on the things that are exceptions to the rule of
right.
every day is suffering 100% of the time,
right.
which is, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk nowadays of finding your why or finding your meaning. And it's become almost sort of a grab bag term that people just like to throw around. But there's a reason it's popular because connecting to a goal, especially at times of difficulty, can be very powerful to help motivate you. And a lot of times it is the joy of the grandkids or just the being able to exercise more or spend time where you can concentrate on your significant others, your loved ones, and not worrying about your own problems. And I mean, whatever the goal may be, I think connecting with it can be so powerful. So do you help people sort of find that and reconnect it? Or do you have little tips you give people of how to reconnect with that goal and how to reconnect with the why?
Yeah. Again, you're absolutely right. And if you can understand a person's values or the things that are really important to them, and that often comes out of these kinds of conversations. So again, using that example, I might then reflect to the person, it sounds like family is really important to you. You say it tentatively, but probably that's what that interaction is telling you when they tell you that the grandchildren have kind of made them have a slightly better day. Family are important to you. Yeah, family is really important. And that can, exploring those kinds of values and, as you say, goals can also lead into, how can you get more of that in your life? How can you kind of use maybe the reduced energy that you have, because people with chronic conditions often have a much less kind of energy to spend during the day. And they often feel that they have to spend it on the things they should do, like the jobs and the kind of maybe the things that don't bring much joy to their lives. So trying to encourage them to notice the times when they're living their values, if you like, and do more of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. They're probably not going to get a lot of this at a general doctor's appointment that they're seeing for their pain medicines or for their diabetes medicines. It's the system just isn't built for that here in the United States, and I assume in England as well.
Yeah.
So it really takes someone like you, someone with that expertise, with the time, with the caring and the knowledge to kind of bring it out of them. Isn't that the case? Well,
I would say kind of yes and no. So yes. It may be that somebody with that specialist skill and training, it might be the right person for somebody. If they've got very, very low and depressed and hopeless, maybe that's the right thing to do. But I also think that, and as you saw, as we did in the kind of demonstration, that you can incorporate these ideas into very brief encounters, even in a hospital where you're making somebody's bed. You can incorporate some of these ideas and questions into those very brief encounters. If you have that kind of mindset yourself where you're kind of asking people those sorts of questions, I think you can, and David does it in his 10-minute appointments. And I think if you've got extended contact with someone, maybe it's only 10 minutes, but that may be every week or in a hospital setting every day, you can then, build up quite a good rapport with somebody.
I guess that's a great point. I mean, you could think of it as like an hour appointment of sitting down and going through all the different things that you're feeling and your goals and your challenges. Or if you only have a 10-minute appointment, simply asking, tell me something good that happened. Tell me a victory you had or a time you felt great. Just that one question. It could take 30 seconds or a minute. But just that one question can make a big difference, couldn't it?
Or tell me about the proudest achievement in your life, or anything like that that's going to improve somebody's kind of sense of confidence and confidence about their own abilities, which they've often lost, haven't they? Exploring how people have got through difficult times. They may be telling you about a very difficult experience. A question like, how did you get through that? How did you do that? What did you? What did any good come out of that at all? Those kinds of questions.
Right, reminding them that they've overcome challenges before.
Yeah.
They've done it before, they can do it again.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned before about setting goals, because achieving goals can be a very powerful, positive influence.
Yeah.
And we talk about long-term goals and short-term goals. So how do you help people kind of framework their goal setting to have that positive feedback and not sort of get bogged down in the, I haven't lost my 50 pounds. My pain isn't completely gone yet, and thinking about the negative, but rather turn them to the positives of goal success?
Yeah. So we talked about in the first appointment or the first sort of conversation with somebody, establishing what better would look like. Mm-hmm. And then I usually get into a sense of scaling that. So I present it as, well, okay, we've talked about that your best hopes would be around, maybe having more energy to play with the grandchildren, or maybe have a goal of taking them on holiday or something, whatever it is for that individual. If that was your 10 out of 10, that was absolutely would be brilliant for you. And 0 out of 10 where absolutely none of that thing exists, or, it feels completely impossible. Where are you now? And 9 times out of 10, people don't say 0, actually. That does occasionally happen, but 9 times out of 10, people would say, well, I did spend an hour with the grandchildren, or I was able to kind of play a game of Snap with them or something. And, maybe I'm a 2 or a 3. And that, again, already gives people a sense of progress. They're not 0. That's a different case. If they say 0, you kind of go down a different road. But maybe a 2 or 3, okay, well, that's really interesting. And, maybe if you were a 3.5, tell me about that. What would that look like? And then they might say, I don't know, I'd take them to the park, or they'll come up with something themselves. The fact that they've come up with it themselves means it's kind of doable. Because they've generated it themselves. You already know that they're contemplating that they could actually do that. Yeah. So you don't actually have to say to the person, go away and do that, or what is the next step. It's not about the means, if you like. It's just asking, well, what would that look like? And then, as I say, 9 times out of 10, they usually go away and do that thing. Not always, but quite often. And because you've not said to go and do it, if they come back and they haven't done it, it's not a failure. So you're never setting someone up for failure.
Right.
Because if they come back and they haven't done it, that's fine. But they might say, well, I didn't do that, but we did, I took them out for a meal, or people go away and have complicated lives, don't they? So I think the trouble with setting specific goals is that sometimes people can't achieve them. So, yeah. Yeah.
I like the idea of having them come up with the idea, framing it in a positive way, and then it sort of gives them the idea to go out and do that. I think that's a good approach.
And then when you see them next time, you can say, well, what's gone well since we last met? What's better? And people often start with something negative, actually, but usually will come up with something that has been better, or they may have done the thing that they said that they would notice. And then you can say, well, 10 out of 10 is where you want to be. And last time we met, you were 2.5. What would you give yourself today, and why, and what else is going well?
Right.
What else have you noticed?
Now, one of the big interventions that we talk a lot about with lifestyle change is nutrition. Right? There's a whole lot to lifestyle change, but nutrition is a big part of it. And in this community, specifically the low carb lifestyle, which we've seen have so many potential benefits, but it's not always so easy for people, is it? I mean, in the keto community, in the low carb community, you hear a lot about success. You hear a lot about people doing wonderfully, but there's a pretty large subset that struggles for different reasons. So tell us what you think some of the biggest struggles you've heard are, and then we can maybe talk about some strategies to get past that. But what are some of the biggest struggles people have, or the reasons why they're not succeeding the way they want?
Yeah, so in the group that we run together, David and myself at his practice, and conversations that we've had there, I think we're coming to think that the the biggest struggle is this sort of addiction, the addictive nature of sugar and carbohydrate. And I think that's, that's a really big topic, and that people can often do really well in the beginning and they get it and they have great success. And then for whatever reason, they slip up, and then the struggle is to sort of get back on track. Yeah. So I would say that's probably the biggest reason for the struggle or for setbacks. And then we try and never frame that as a failure, but just as, well, God, that's interesting. Okay, what were the kind of circumstances of coming off track? If they want to get back on track, what caused that, and how might you handle that differently next time? Would you have a different plan? How are you going to get back on track?
And I'm sure some of the most common reasons for people slipping up can frequently be, increased stress, a job change, or a death in the family, or someone sick, or some sort of internal stressor where then you turn to that addiction of food and carbs and sugar for comfort.
Absolutely. And I think, people have to forgive themselves for that. I think there's another whole layer, isn't there, where people are very self-critical about that. And, that's only going to add to the stress, isn't it? It's easier said than done, isn't it? But, acknowledging that most people are going to fall off the wagon at some point, and sometimes big things are going on in life, and you have to prioritize. Sometimes that's the priority.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. That when I work with people, I want to lay out from the beginning, look, you're not going to be perfect. Yeah. Nobody's perfect. There are going to be setbacks. So get it in their mind. So like you said, it's not a failure when it happens. It's almost sort of an expected occurrence, but to learn from it. So I like what you said. You said, well, how would you do it differently next time? Not, why did you do that? Why did that happen? Right?
And also reminding people, well, how did you feel when you were really kind of in the zone, or when you were really happy with how your kind of nutrition was going? What do you notice about yourself? And they always come up with, well, I was energetic and I was sleeping well and I had loads of energy and felt good. So again, reminding people of when they've been at their best and trying to get back to that. How did you do it last time?
Yeah.
How did you do it in the first place? How did you get in that good place for you?
And to prepare for the same thing to happen again, because if something happened once, chances are it can happen again. Yeah. And how would it be different? So even like a really bad night's sleep. Yeah. Right. I think we've all had that, and carb craving the next day.
And there's evidence for that, isn't there? That it really does make people eat more the following day.
Right. Yeah. The leptin, ghrelin, the hormones of I'm full or I'm hungry are all thrown off.
And that can help people, can't it? And you can say, the science will tell you that's going to happen. Yeah.
Right. It's not your fault. It's the science. It's your body
it's your
hormones.
Physiology. That's a really big thing, I think, about the self-blame thing about the addiction. And I think it's really... It does really help people to label it sometimes. For some people, to label it as an addiction, so that they can say, right, that's my, this stuff is affecting my brain. It's not, it's not. The other thing I was thinking, you were talking, was that I often say to people, it's how do we learn to ride a bike? We fall off a lot, don't we? You learn to balance by falling one side and then falling the other side, and learning a new skill is about wobbling.
Right. Great analogy.
Yeah. So you fell off, and I think David showed that graph, didn't he, where the guy learned 3 times, and the third time did much better, and each time the oscillations was slightly less. Yeah. So people may fall off spectacular style, but I think if they can remember how well they felt when they were doing it and how they did it the first time, and they can get back on again. And
one of the other interesting things is just the environment that you're in. So it can be relatively easy to control your home environment, or it can be relatively difficult if you have kids and a significant other who maybe aren't on the same program as you. Mm-hmm. What kind of advice can you give people to help with the home environment to make it as sort of risk-free as possible?
That's a really good point.
Tempting-free as possible.
The environment's it's a really big one, isn't it? Because we know that willpower is exhaustible, isn't it? So you get home at the end of the day, you've had a long day at work, all your intentions are good to cook yourself this kind of healthy dinner, and then I don't know what's sitting on the counter, a packet of crisps or something someone else has left there. So difficult, when you're tired, to kind of stick to stuff. So I would say to people, it's about building those good habits and engineering the environment. Yeah. So if you can put stuff out of sight, so if other people in the house want to have it, can you have your own cupboard and only go in that cupboard? Right. Can you have your own shelf on the fridge? And so that you're kind of training yourself to those sort of new habits, really. And that if you tend to overeat certain things, even if they might be kind of the kind of things you're allowed to eat, like often we overeat nuts, don't we, or cheese, and maybe you don't want to. There's quite a lot of good food science about packaging things up in smaller packets. So even if you buy things in bulk, then transfer them into smaller pots.
Right.
Nuts, can you put them in the little click boxes in portions? Because it sounds like such a tiny thing, but actually psychologically, you will eat less if you're doing that than if you've just got the giant packet.
Right.
They've done quite a few studies on that with popcorn mostly, but that if people have a giant bucket, they eat much more.
Oh goodness, salted macadamia nuts. If there's a big bag of them, I'm in trouble.
Yeah, we all have things that actually we can't moderate, and that's the other thing I say to people, like, that's unique to you. So if that's the thing that you can't moderate, well, you've got a choice there of maybe not buying it. And, I'm the same. I have peanut butter, I can't moderate it. So we just don't buy it now, don't have it in the house.
Right.
Have other things. So, so engineering the environment, thinking about preparation, taking things to work rather than being tempted to go to the canteen. If there's some canteens, obviously, you're going to find would have good options, but some places, I guess, there's not going to be much that you get to want to eat. So,
right, work is a whole nother environment, because there you have a lot less control. Right, at home you can tell your family, you can set things up, you can have somewhat control over people. Yes. But at work, you may have to give up all control, and there's going to be candy jars, and there's going to be cake in the break room, and there's going to be chips everywhere.
Cake pushers, yeah. There's nearly always some cupcake baking person, isn't there, in the office who's bringing things in, and I think that's another challenge. And we often talk about how you can even kind of maybe do some role plays to practice how you might politely turn down cake. I think people socially feel quite awkward saying no to someone who's made them a special cupcake or something, to kind of take it out of politeness. And so trying to think how you can have those conversations with people in a way that you feel comfortable with. And, if do you want to put kind of that politeness above your own health? It's that, isn't it? All of these things are challenges, aren't they? And I think all of us are still on a learning journey. I mean, we've been doing this for 6 or 7 years ourselves, and I think still a challenge.
Right. I like the idea of role play, because it could be in your whole life you've never said no to somebody offering you a sweet or offering you a treat. So when it happens, you could be very uncomfortable to do that. So having had the experience beforehand in sort of a safe environment where you can practice that, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, and you can come up with little phases like, so if people offer me a bag of, you want a sweet from your bag, I say, I'm trying to give them up, or something like that, or they say, don't you like cake? And I say, I love cake, but it doesn't love me. Yeah. So I think you can do it in a humorous way, or you can just be upfront with people and say, you're really trying hard for health reasons, or trying to lose weight. And I think people are sympathetic with that, aren't they?
Sometimes I recommend people actually have like a signed contract that they have their family signed, or maybe a coworker sign. And sometimes people think it's a little cheesy and a little over the top, but it can be really helpful, because then people understand where you're coming from ahead of time, and then hopefully they'll stop offering you the cake because they know what your goals are and they know what you're trying to accomplish.
I think that's a really good idea. Or even to have that conversation and say, I'm really trying to achieve this for myself. It's really important for me. Help me by, don't offer me that stuff.
Right.
Yeah. And what about asking for people's help? I think people are, on the whole, we all want people to be happy and support our colleagues, don't we? So
Right. And what about people who just have this psychological barrier to just, I just love bread. I just love pasta. I just can't give it up. But yet they have had some success with low carb, but they keep falling back because it's just kind of a core of who they think they are. How do you help them get over that?
It's really difficult. It's really difficult, isn't it? I think going back to, what their ultimate goals are. So it's having that kind of, that motivation for a sort of future goal where we can maybe get over that hump of trying to give something up. I think explaining about addiction, I think that's important. The other thing is about, what else have they got in their lives that they love that isn't food related? So that's often a conversation I have with people, because so if there's a food addiction issue, we know that hijacks the dopamine pathways and other neurotransmitters, and dopamine is really strongly linked with motivation. But what it does is it makes you just motivated for that one thing. You're getting all your reward from food. So let's name that, and let's think where else you might get rewards or kind of pleasurable brain experiences. So what hobbies, or what physical activity is actually a really big one, isn't it? That's a really not necessarily for weight loss, but to enhance people's mental health. And I think that has a really powerful effect if you can just get people even walking. We know all the science is there for mental health and exercise. And to get those kind of good endorphins going. What hobbies have they maybe given up? Either due to their size or pain or whatever, but what kind of things might they enjoy? Social connectedness, all of those things are other ways of getting
great point. If
that good feeling.
Right. If you're taking something away that they're used to getting, that dopamine rush or that good feeling, you can't just take it away and expect success without replacing it with something else. Hopefully something healthier.
Building up. And again, moving towards that kind of life that they want,
Are there other struggles you see people go through, other sort of common themes that come up that you address with people?
The kind of struggles in the kind of perennial questions we get in the group would be exactly as you say, like at work, what do I take? If I'm traveling, how do I deal with that? And it's always all about planning. The addiction side of things, falling off the wagon. What else did the group talk about? So those are probably the big ones, I would say.
And then as you see them progress, as you see them have hope, I assume you just see a tremendous amount of success.
Yeah, in the group, it's lovely. And the other thing is celebrating that success, obviously, as you go along. I think you saw the photo of the lady with the jeans. So we encourage people who've had either notice something about their health or their well-being, or they've reached their goal, or we'll get them to share that, because it inspires other people. There's nothing so inspirational as seeing someone else who you identify with, who lives in your community, who might be the same age as you, doing amazingly. And quite a few people in the group have been doing it for 5 or 6 years now. There's 1 or 2 people still losing weight after all that time. Who have lost really a significant amount, 6 or 7 stone, and they will occasionally bring in their photos to show the new people who always are absolutely blown away.
Yeah. And for that person to be the example, to be the shining example of success, must just lift them up.
So hopeful for the people coming in, but so fantastic for them as well, because then that becomes part of their kind of own view of themselves as a success, as an inspiration to other people. They can see how far they've come.
Yeah. And I know there can be a lot of goals, but weight loss frequently is one of the big goals. And, weight loss rarely goes in a straight line. There are, ups and downs and ebbs and flows. So let's talk about stalls. People like to talk about stalls. I was doing great, and then I stalled on my weight loss. I started to gain a few pounds. What goes through your brain as sort of a checklist to help this person figure out why they stalled and how they get past their stall?
That's right. Usually it's about thinking about how have things been creeping in, like we were saying about, the nuts and the cheese and those kinds of things. Have they actually been drifting? Carb drift is another thing, isn't it? The little things are creeping in, like maybe the old biscuits at work, that kind of thing. The other thing I think that David often brings in is the time-restricted eating idea, and people really get that, but because he explains a lot about physiology to the patients, and the idea of trying to keep insulin low, and not needing to eat breakfast, and there's all the evidence now, isn't there, for the kind of time,
right.
the kind of window eating. So I think that can be a kind of second phase for people once they've got used to the idea of the whole nutrition side. Then they can start reducing the window, but also David always is really against snacking
right.
because again that can creep up, can't it? So I think if you can base your daily routine around meals, and not kind of that, not an endless grazing. Again, there's evidence for that because of the insulin side. So
snacking frequently is more of a psychological issue than a biological or
feeling
hunger
a bit weary, or you kind of fancy a treat, and we've all been kind of trained into the snacking thing, haven't we? And sometimes it still blows my mind how far this is from the sort of conventional wisdom that we all grew up with, which is eat little and often, eat low fat,
Right. I'm sure that takes quite a bit of education too, just for people to understand that what they've heard and what they've been taught for decades actually isn't necessarily the right path to success.
And there's an emotional response to that, I think. I had one myself, which was, I can't believe all those decades that kind of struggling to do that. And there was a speaker yesterday who said about blaming themselves for not being successful in that. Mm-hmm. Whilst being successful in other areas of your life, and having that whole area that was a struggle the whole time. Well, when you find out you didn't really need to struggle, there was a response to that. And having had family members who definitely would have benefited from this, I know for sure that my mother would have been so much more well. I'm trying to find the right way to put that. Because we have basically the same sort of physiology, you kind of, there's an emotional response to that, isn't there? And people have that as well in the group. Yeah.
So how many people do you work with at once in your group?
The numbers are kind of creeping up over the years because we never say people can't come back, and they often bring, what we like is for people to bring a family member if they wish to. So maybe the person who does the shopping and the cooking, and we often find that they, obviously they're losing weight as well as other members of the family, neighbours, and so on. So some people often bring someone with them. So we definitely need a bigger room, standing room only. At some of the groups we've had, 20, 30 people. It
That's
started
wonderful.
off as only a few. But we still get a good interaction as well, and people, sharing success, asking questions, sharing recipes.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I've got a little Facebook group for them as well.
Yeah, and I'm sure that shows the power of community, how just the belonging to the group, that having other people to share the experience, share the struggles, share the successes. Yeah. I'm sure that goes a long way for lifting hope, like you were saying.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And, the fact that people are still engaged after 6 years is, it's a great sign, isn't it, that they're finding it helpful. And I think the long-term support is important, either through online communities like Diet Doctor, or through finding a local group, or just doing it with someone else. Really, I think that does really help. Right,
it's not like it's just a 6-month thing and then all the challenges go away. It doesn't work that way. The challenges continue for years. But
once a sugar addict, always a sugar addict. It's only like the same struggles people have with drug and alcohol, isn't it? Those are lifelong struggles, but there are ways to keep on the bicycle.
Right. And it's great to see the long-term success. So I'm sure you must feel very, very full and very joyful to see all the success that you're helping people have.
It's really uplifting to see the difference. I'm sure you feel the same, to see the difference it makes in people's life. Someone who's has been, extremely overweight and on lots of medication and feeling unwell, to then see them, jogging around town and, really enjoying their lives. That's special.
Oh, it's wonderful. Wonderful. Well, thank you for joining me today. I love the message of hope and the message of success, and how we can kind of put that out to people to show them that, yes, this can be done, and yes, you can do it, and here's how. And yeah, it's a wonderful message. So
Thank you.
if people want to learn more about you, where can you direct them to hear more about your thoughts and what you're working on?
I guess the other videos. There's a bit of stuff on diabetes.co.uk as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you again for joining me. It's been a great
You're very
conversation.
welcome. Thank you. I enjoyed it. Thank you.